as a part of the journalism world and as a fan, because this is a normal feature of almost every game. There was a preseason game a couple of weeks ago, and remember, these are just preseason games. These are games that don't count, they don't matter, they're strictly done not necessarily to evaluate the players, but to entertain the fans, to get them out to the stadium one more time and spend, and to provide more TV programming and radio programming. And players were carted off the field from the same team. It was the Cincinnati Bengals, ironically enough, 3 different times in the span of 5 plays. And it was this constant shot of the coaches just looking disconsolate, and players down on their knees, praying for their teammates' health, and the cart was rolling out, and they're carrying they're carting the player off, and one of the players had to be strapped to the board. He has to give the thumbs up to the fans to let him know that he at least has function in his limbs, and then they just move on to the next play.
I remember this from Daryl Stingley, and feeling as a 9 or 10-year-old, oh my gracious, we're just going to move on. Somebody has been paralyzed right in front of my eyes. The sports media has a job, and it's partly to be as promoters of the game, and that means they have to reduce all of the big moral issues to a momentary scandal. So you talked about Ray Rice, and people did express distress about that. But the larger crisis, if you take a step back, is that we have a game that teaches young men to channel their aggression and express their aggression and be as savage as possible, and rewards them for that savagery, and we the fans consume that savagery. That's why they have parabolic mics, and we see the replays over and over again, and then we expect them off the field to be gentlemen role models. Or a sport, Jane, that defines femininity and womanhood as something that's basically sexual and ornamental, and masculinity is savage and aggressive and tough. That's the fundamental moral questions that fans need to be asking themselves, and it's scary as can be because they just want to see it as a game.
Let's get some listeners in here now. Gene is in Miami, Florida. Hi, Gene. Welcome to On Point.
Hi, Gene. I'm not a fan, but I'd like to venture a comment and an observation just the same. I follow this conversation closely, and I think, as mores change in the society, like from a bigger picture, right? As mores change in the society, that what we allow to entertain us also changes. Take the example, I'd like to draw a parallel with Spain. Bullfighting in Spain has a longer history and tradition than football in the United States. For millennia, the Spanish have been bullfighting, but the province of Catalonia has recently outlawed it. And they've taken the arenas where they used to do the bullfighting, and they turned them into concert, venues. And so, I think even at one time, feeding Christians to the lions was entertainment. We wouldn't even consider that today. So we're on we're like on a path. I'm encouraged by this conversation. I mean, I was born and raised in this country in and around football, never took to it. But I really appreciate this conversation because it raises everyone's awareness about it. We're openly speaking about it. And, I mean, at this point, all I could say in my comment would be, hooray, let's go as Americans. We can do this. We can move beyond, football and find another expression for
Harrison was thrown out of the game for targeting, and like I said, Colt McCoy was taken out of the game and was originally missed quite a few games, and that was what I remember was causing the big uproar in the NFL in terms of player safety and what was going to happen to the players who were accused of targeting via suspensions or fines and things like that. And ever since then, that has, you see it any game, anyone who even gets close to the head will get some sort of a fine. And then in terms of how the media kind of pushes player safety to the wayside. I remember watching Rutgers whenever Eric LeGrand suffered his injury, and so it's one of those things that does tug at your heart, and it's very sad to see something like that, and you do either change the channel and you just don't want to watch any more of that, or you just continue watching and you hope that your reports throughout the game is how the player's doing. So I think it really stems to fans themselves. at what point are they willing to say, okay, I've had enough of watching that particular game or even that sport, and they decide to go to something else?
Leon, thank you.
Yeah, that's what it's going to take. And people, that's the answer that nobody wants, is that it actually ultimately redounds on the fans to somehow, because that's the only way that a huge billion-dollar business is going to change. The NFL is a corporation, okay, where their conscience should be as a cash register. And they've shown that over and over again. The reason that they're being sued by 4,500 former players is not just because the players want their medical bills paid. It's because they're accusing the NFL of consciously covering up the link between the sport that they played and brain damage and damage to the brain. That's what they did for years, and they got away with it because ultimately the fans let them get away with it.
Well, we're talking about whether there's something rotten in the game of football today, whether it's time for big changes in the way the game is played, the way it's paid for. How do you fix it? 1-800-423-8255 is our number, 1-800-423-TALK. Many more of your calls after this break. I'm Jane Clayson in for Tom Ashbrook. This is On Point.
Support for On Point comes from WBUR Boston. Moo, offering business cards with Printfinity, the option for a different image on every card in a pack. Learn more at moo.com. And the Institute of Contemporary Art Boston, with art and music combining in The Visitors, a 9-screen video by Ragnar Kjartansson on view now. ICABoston.org.
WWNO comes from Fat Happy Media, a video production company helping New Orleans businesses write, film, and edit short videos that show the world what they do. Portfolios and planning information at fathappymedia.com.
The life of a professional comedian is filled with highs and lows, some major, some minor.
So the lady says, "Oh, Mr. Cosby, they threw the chicken out. Why would you throw it out?" She said, "Well, because it will spoil." I said, "That's a double lie."
Legendary comedian Bill Cosby on the next Louisiana Eats. Saturdays at 11 and Wednesdays at 1 on WWNO 89.9 FM.
For WWNO comes from the Community Center at Christwood, presenting Lunch and Learn, featuring Kevin Mizell, physical therapist with St. Tammany Parish Hospital. Kevin will discuss reasons for and prevention of low back pain, September 10th from 11:30 to 1 p.m. More at 985-292-1234.
This is On Point. I'm Jane Clayson in for Tom Ashbrook. We're talking about reforming football's culture, cutting down on injuries, taming its players' worst behavior, and our own worst impulses as fans this hour. You can join the conversation. Let's hear your list of changes. Let's hear your non-negotiables, the things you do not want to see changed in the game of football. We're at 1-800-423-8255. That's 1-800-423-TALK. You can also follow us on Twitter and find us on Facebook at On Point Radio. My guests are Steve Allman, author of the new book called Against Football, and David Steele, columnist for Sporting News. I'd like now to introduce one more voice into the conversation, a really expert voice with a lot of first-hand experience of this game. Nate Jackson was a tight end for the Denver Broncos, the San Francisco 49ers, and the Cleveland Browns in an NFL career that lasted from 2002 until 2009. Now he's a writer. His book, out in paperback, is called Slow Getting Up, a story of NFL survival from the bottom of the pile. And he joins us from Portland, Oregon today. Nate, it's so great to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
So as a player, what did you think of what you've been hearing here?
I think it's all really interesting, and I think it's a really important conversation to have. And as a player, it's interesting to hear it also because the players are the only ones really that are left out of all these decisions, always, in football matters, whether it's on the field or it's off the field. The players don't have any say in the way they live their lives, in the way they play the game, in the rules that they have to follow. And so I think until that changes, counting on an existential crisis or dilemma to fix the game is going to be really difficult.
So give us an example of that, Nate, a rule that a player doesn't, have say over.
Well, the head shots, the way that they enforce penalties, to me is more of a public relations move than it is an actual concern about health or safety. There is no healthy or safe way to bring another man to the ground. Roger Goodell kind of knows this, and he knows that everyone is so big, so fast, so strong. It's impossible to legislate the point of impact, meaning it's impossible to pick exactly where you're going to hit another man who's constantly moving. And the tackle itself represents, like Steve was saying, a very, very small percentage of the actual football hits that are happening. But the way they enforce their headshot penalties is based on tackles. But every play, everyone's blocking head first. That's how we're taught in these meeting rooms. And so there's a interesting dichotomy between the way the league enforces these rules and the way we are taught in meeting rooms. We are taught to turn ourselves into weapons, into missiles, and you do that by using your forehead.
So when you saw Wes Welker just get his third concussion in the last 10 months, what was your reaction? What did you think? Time to go or just plow on? What did you think?
The logical thing would say time to go, but it's easier for us to say that out here. When you're inside of that life, Wes Welker's entire identity is wrapped up in the game. The way everyone treats him in his life is based on how he performs on the field. And as a football player, when you're not playing, when you're not performing, you feel like your life's purpose has been booted. I don't exist unless I'm on that field playing football. The way your family treats you, the way your friends, the way the media will jump all over someone they believe is not tough enough. We saw that a couple years ago with Jay Cutler, a former friend of mine who was injured in an NFC Championship game, and he pulled himself out. And over the next week or two, he had to field questions and watch on TV as people speculated as to whether he was tough enough to play the game and whether he wanted it bad enough. And so players are always being judged by all these people, and it affects us. It affects how we live our lives. And even after stepping away from the game and thinking about all this very critically and understanding the perils, when I was playing, I had to be dragged off the field, really. I was going to play until no one else wanted me, and it had a very, very powerful control over my body. As long as people are out there watching, these guys will be playing. As long as they're paying to watch, these guys will play. And they'll do it until everyone leaves the stadium.
Steve Allman, that's a key piece of this.
Yeah, and I think actually Nate's book, is such a fantastic book, Slow Getting Up, because it really takes you inside what it is like to be a player. And what I was struck by, Nate, is you're just hurt all the time. You're constantly expected to perform at the highest level, but you're also, half the book is you in recovery, suffering from one injury or another. Fans really don't see that. You know what fans see? They see game day. They see whether their guy on their fantasy football team is going to be, is healthy this week. And frankly, they're angry if he's not. There's this ethos among the fans that's so entitled and psychotic, really. It's like, these guys are just me. These guys are the ones who are supposed to perform heroically as a proxy for my little ego drama that's going on. And they're ultimately objectified and degraded. And that becomes very apparent when you talk to any professional athlete, that's a whole human being that's been told all their life that why they matter is because of what they can do on the field.
Let's get a caller in here. Chelsea in Princeton, New Jersey. Hi, Chelsea. Glad you waited. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Jane. Thanks for taking my call.
Of course. Go ahead.
So I just wanted to bring up an element of the conversation that I'd love for some of our guests to speak to. I attended a very large Division I institution where football was really huge. I actually volunteered as a football recruiter. And one thing that I noticed is the impact that football culture, particularly college football culture, has on young men of color and the ways that young men of color are disproportionately impacted by some of these elements that we're talking about, some of the harm that football and football culture can cause. For example, disproportionately many young men of color would come with these high hopes of obtaining their education, and so few of them would actually graduate from the institution with that degree, and they would end up coming away instead with injuries and with other things that would last them for their entire life, but without having that social mobility that a lot of, I think, college institutions will say that they give to their young men of color who they recruit to be their football stars. So I was wondering if folks would like to comment on that racial element.
Excellent point, Chelsea. I'm so glad you called. Thank you. Steve?
Well, one of the most disturbing things, I actually think this is the most disturbing part of this whole equation. When I was in Miami, I just was a reporter, and I basically spent a year in a place called the James Scott Homes, a housing development in Liberty City. And the whole culture there was really dedicated to the idea of football as your economic salvation. Parents would talk about it, and coaches would talk about it. That's what young men without a lot of economic prospects otherwise, and almost inevitably young men of color, that was the path that they were supposed to take. But that's a false dream that we are selling, and it's not an adequate substitution for real forms of actually providing equality of opportunity. 1 out of every 500 kids who plays high school football is going to become a pro player, and as Nate knows, a pro player is like the average career is 3 years. They are not going to make a life. They are not going to contribute to society by being sold that false dream. A lot of what we do, and I think it is racially skewed, is essentially these kids are harvested from economically vulnerable neighborhoods, and they are desperate for the idea of having meaning in the world, being an important person in the world, and we tell them the only way to have that meaning is not the content of their character or their mind, but what they can do on the field as their physical prowess.
David Steele, speak to that point.
Yeah, that's the most heinous part of all of this for me as well, particularly the college end of it, because that's the group that's taken advantage of the most, that's exploited the most, and the part that has this is not an accident. This is not a mistake. It's not a coincidence that those are the areas that the schools go to recruit these players. They know that they're economically disadvantaged, and a lot of times completely.